pleasure to introduce Rod Baltzer. He's been the president of Waste Control Specialists since 2006. He was at the helm when we got our initial licenses, when we constructed our facilities, including our federal low-level radioactive waste disposal facility that we operate. And then when the construction and operations, which began in 2012. So Rod Baltzer, why don't you tell them why we're here?
Thank you, Chuck. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. A little more than a year ago in this very room, we announced that we had filed a notice of intent to apply for a license to construct and operate a consolidated interim storage facility for spent nuclear fuel in response to the country's biggest nuclear waste management problem. We informed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at that time that we would be submitting a license application in early 2016. And I am proud to stand before you today alongside our valued partners Areva and NAC International to tell you that we submitted the application this morning. And it was great, had some photo shots and opportunities, and unfortunately it was all electronic, so it is a very thin binder worth of things. We expect the NRC will take approximately 3 years to review our application, and if it's approved, we plan to begin construction immediately in order to reach our goal of accepting used fuel by 2021. In the meantime, we will continue to work with the U.S. Department of Energy and Congress to clarify the Department of Energy's authority to take title to used fuel and provide an appropriate funding mechanism. Before I go any further, I'd like to take a minute to recognize our team. I'll let my colleagues at Areva and NAC describe their respective roles when they follow me here at the podium. But I just want to say the reason that this is such a robust application is because of the expertise of the team. Both of these companies are global leaders in the nuclear fuel storage systems. In this country, between the two of them, they handle 62% of existing dry cask storage for used nuclear fuel in the United States. In addition to their storage programs, both have expertise in transporting used nuclear fuel. So the fact that they have a proven record for the design and deployment of innovative technologies to transport, manage, and store used fuel gives us a head start in the application process. So what are we doing? Specifically, we're applying for an initial 40-year license to store 40,000 metric tons of used nuclear fuel. The facility will be built in 8 phases. Each of the 8 phases will be able to accommodate 5,000 metric tons. We anticipate asking for 20-year renewals after the initial 40-year license period. We've also told our community that that could be 60 to 100 years, so they understand interim storage could be for a long period of time. In our license application, we have prioritized decommissioned nuclear power plants with stranded used fuel to be the first to benefit from consolidated interim storage. This includes fuel from 7 currently shut down and decommissioned or decommissioning sites, comprising over 80% of the stranded fuel identified in the Blue Ribbon Commission's report. The primary operations performed at the site will be transferring the used fuel contained in a sealed canister from a transportation cask into an engineered interim used fuel storage system. Keep in mind that there are approximately 70,000 metric tons of used nuclear fuel stored in this country today, and more is generated every year. So our facility would still only be part of the solution, albeit a very important part. So here's the benefits of our proposal. We have the ideal location, we have the experience, and we have a consent-based site. Let me start with that last point, because frankly, that's the most important. We've got a proven record of ongoing community support for our low-level operations and facilities out in West Texas. And we were able to secure strong support for storing high-level radioactive waste before we filed our notice of intent last year. If we didn't get that strong community support, we would not have filed the license application today. We conducted months of one-on-one briefings with the community leaders and elected officials in Andrews County. We held a highly publicized community meeting attended by 400+ citizens of Andrews. Shortly after that, the Andrews County Commissioners Court unanimously approved a resolution in support of WCS's intention to seek this license. We are ideally located on 14,000 acres in an arid, isolated part of the state. For the consolidated interim storage facility, we're expanding an existing radioactive waste facility and not starting from the ground up from a greenfield site. We have experience handling low-level radioactive waste that we receive in specialized transportation casks. We can also treat and store, but not dispose of, greater than Class C and transuranic waste. We have a robust infrastructure, including our own rail spur, which provides direct access to the site. You can see on the map over here our existing facilities and landfills and things. This is not a greenfield site. We're already up and operating. We also have experience operating under strict federal and state oversight. Our ability to expand an existing radioactive waste facility instead of having to start from scratch greatly reduces the cost and risk of licensing, development, and construction. Finally, our proposal for interim storage offers key benefits to the nuclear industry, not the least of which is that our efforts will further the establishment of a permanent geologic repository. I'd now like to turn the podium over to Mike McMahon of AREVA. He's the Senior Vice President and Director of the WCS Consolidated Interim Storage Project.
Thank you, Rod. I'm very pleased to be here today to mark this occasion and to represent AREVA as a proud member of this team. Our role in the team was to provide the technical basis and licensing knowledge for our storage systems to create the safety analysis report that formed an integral part of the application that was submitted this morning. It's been a great experience to work with Rod and Kent and their teams and to contribute our extensive dry fuel storage experience to this project. As many of you already know, AREVA has the most dry fuel storage systems deployed in the U.S. today and has over 1,000 systems deployed around the globe. As this project continues, we also look forward to contributing our unmatched experience in safely transporting used nuclear fuel. It turns out that 50 years ago this month, April 10th, 1966, we made our very first transport of used nuclear fuel from the Chinon reactor site in France. In the 50 years since then, we have safely transported over 75,000 used fuel assemblies with no damage to the fuel during transport, no damage or leaks from any of our casks. We are extremely proud of our safety record, and later this year, we will be celebrating our 5,000th safe shipment of used nuclear fuel. As we mark this occasion today, I'd like to share with you why we think this is such an important endeavor and why we feel a sense of urgency to move it forward. Let's remember that when the Blue Ribbon Commission issued its final report in January 2012, it identified 10 sites in the U.S. that had what it called stranded used nuclear fuel. In other words, used nuclear fuel stored at sites at which there was no longer an operating commercial reactor. Today, 4 years later, instead of 10, there are now 14 stranded sites in the U.S. due to early plant closures. Look ahead 3 years from now, when we expect to get our license, there will be at least 17, according to announced plant closures. We know this number will only continue to increase in the decades it may take for a geological repository to begin operating in the U.S. As an example, let's look at the year 2048, which is the target date set by the DOE and its strategy for the management and disposal of used nuclear fuel and high-level waste. If we optimistically assume there will be no additional early plant closures, and we also assume that every currently operating plant gets its 60-year license extension, there will be an eye-popping 69 stranded sites in the U.S. at that time. Without a consolidated interim storage facility in the near term, and with nowhere else to ship this fuel, the U.S. taxpayer will face rapidly increasing annual costs and a multi-billion-dollar additional liability, driven by this bow wave of plant closures that will occur in the late 2020s as many of the reactors in the aging U.S. fleet reach the end of their operating lifetimes. The proposed WCS interim storage facility offers an economically efficient solution to this problem. It will reduce the overall expenditure of the federal government by hundreds of millions of dollars, and it will save the U.S. taxpayer over $5.4 billion over this time. There will also be an additional benefit of over $1 billion to the local communities that are currently hosting or will host in the future de facto interim storage facilities at decommissioning reactor sites around the country, because they'll be able to more constructively repurpose the land that's now only being used to simply store stranded nuclear fuel. In addition to these economic benefits, interim storage also gives our country's used fuel management system additional flexibility and capability that will directly benefit the U.S. repository program. To understand how this works, it's helpful to think as the U.S. used fuel management program as an integrated system and not just separate components. A system with both interim storage and a repository will be much more robust and would eliminate the current single point of failure vulnerability that we are experiencing today. Put more simply, we avoid putting all our eggs into one basket and completely shutting down the entire system if there is a problem with any one component. Interim storage deployment would also help to remove barriers to repository implementation by resolving public concerns, technical issues, and licensing contentions in the near term. The most obvious example of this is that we would have an early demonstration of the used nuclear fuel transportation infrastructure that will be essential to repository operations. Additionally, by not waiting an additional 30 years to move fuel, we reduce the risk that there'll be further degradation of the infrastructure at these permanently shut down sites. Another benefit, it also creates a robust facility that could be used to expand and develop and deploy repackaging technology that may be needed for final repository operations. So remember that the 22,000 tons of fuel currently in dry storage is not designed to be directly disposed of in the repository. Unless there's a significant design change, it'll have to be repackaged and stored into disposal packages. This facility provides an ideal facility for that. In addition, it gives us a huge inventory and an integrated database from which to optimize the fuel loading to make sure repository performance is at its optimum. In this way, we can see interim storage would provide numerous system-wide benefits and flexibilities to help advance a geological disposal program. I'd like now to turn this over to Kent Cole. Kent is the President and CEO of NAC International.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very pleased to be here today to mark this significant milestone and to represent NAC as a proud member of this team. NAC's role on the team, along with AREVA's, was to provide technical expertise and licensing basis for our array of licensed systems to create the safety analysis report that was an integral part of the license application that was submitted today. It has been a great experience working with Rod and the WCS team and Mike and the AREVA team by contributing NAC's extensive dry storage experience to this project of great national importance. The three companies came together and have worked very efficiently and effectively over the last 12 months to achieve this milestone. In Rod's remarks, he mentioned that the licensing of high-level radioactive waste is a very technically exacting process. NAC has 30-plus years of experience in working with the NRC to obtain approvals for a wide array of spent nuclear fuel storage and transportation systems. We've designed and supplied more than 460 NRC licensed CAS systems for storage and transportation. And our licensed transportation casks have been used for more than 3,000 CAS movements of used nuclear fuel from more than 80 facilities around the world. NAC's CAS systems store 70% of the used nuclear fuel for customers with stranded and decommissioned sites that were mentioned in the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission report. We designed, fabricated, and supported the cask loading and sealing operations of these systems, and this makes us uniquely qualified to assure their subsequent safe storage, transportation, and aging management. We believe the mission is not yet finished at these sites. Our customers at these decommissioned nuclear reactor sites with stranded spent nuclear fuel never signed up for indefinite on-site storage after the decommissioning, and neither did the communities surrounding them. A CISF offers a viable near-term opportunity to fix this inequity by removing the spent fuel canisters from the site and consolidating them at the WCS site, where they can be safely and securely stored more efficiently. This returns valuable lands land to these communities for reuse. The licensing approach utilized for the WCS Consolidated Interim Storage Facility is simple, safe, and certain. It's a no-surprises technical approach that relies heavily on NRC approvals of record to minimize the amount of new material that the NRC has to review. This will make most effective use of limited NRC resources and provide the lowest risk and most straightforward and efficient path for obtaining the NRC license. Specifically, the WCS Consolidated Interim Storage Facility licensing approach is to use existing, proven technology that has already been deployed for storing canisters at reactor sites. Each company that originally designed, analyzed, licensed, and fabricated the systems, the ones who know it best and possess and control the essential and valuable proprietary design information, is responsible for providing the existing and proven compatible storage and transportation overpacks for its customers. This leverages to the maximum extent what has already been designed, licensed, and loaded, and vastly streamlines the licensing process. WCS, AREVA, and NAC also intend to further permit canisters supplied by other vendors at shutdown sites to be stored at the WCS Consolidated Interim Storage Facility in the same technology as utilized at the reactors where it was first loaded. This would be implemented in subsequent license amendments to the initial application, which includes only NAC and AREVA systems for shutdown or soon-to-be shutdown sites. NAC is pleased to be part of this very important initiative to provide one key element of the waste solution for the U.S. nuclear industry and to benefit those communities that hosted nuclear reactors over the years as well. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Chuck.
Thank all of y'all for your remarks, and we're about to start the question and answer portion of the program. But before we do, I think it would be helpful to hear from one of those, what the Blue Ribbon Commission report called stranded fuel sites. So we're very fortunate that Elizabeth Kelsey agreed to come over here. She represents the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, which for years operated the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant. And that plant has been decommissioned for a number of years now. It was one of those identified for the Blue Ribbon Commission report. The SMUD has been active for a number of years in the decommissioned plant coalition, so I think it's appropriate for Elizabeth to come up here and talk about what this proposal means. After we hear from Elizabeth, we'll begin the Q&A program.
Good afternoon, and thanks, gentlemen, for the opportunity to provide this statement of support. As you heard, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUD, provides power to Sacramento County and small adjoining portions of Placer and Yolo counties on a not-for-profit basis. 27 years ago, SMUD ceased operations at Rancho Seco Nuclear Generating Station. The utility successfully completed the decommissioning process in 2009, and since that time has safely maintained an independent spent fuel storage installation which houses the spent fuel destined for pickup by the Department of Energy. To date, SMUD has won judgments against the federal government totaling $73 million to recover the costs of maintaining this stranded fuel. SMUD and the Decommissioning Plant Coalition are in support of safe and timely alternative solutions to the current political stalemate with regard to our federal waste management policy. The proposed waste control specialist facility would provide that safe and timely alternative that allows the government to fulfill its obligations to SMUD and DPC members, remove the waste material from their sites, and stop the endless cycle of litigation to recover costs for management of the material. SMUD and DPC believe that CIS can be developed independently and in parallel with the Yucca Mountain facility, which remains the federally legislated final repository for our stranded materials. As such, CIS is entirely neutral on a final repository. It doesn't hinder further development of Yucca Mountain nor development of potential alternatives to Yucca. What this facility would do is provide the first step in achieving significant cost savings to the federal government by taking title to this material. We appreciate the efforts of waste control specialists to chart a new path forward in this regard. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, and thank all y'all for being here. And so now we're going to do the Q&A from the credentialed members of the news media. We appreciate it. We appreciate everyone who's here, but I want to limit the questions to the press that we are specifically interested in hearing from. My colleague, Ricardo Lopez Guerra, playing Phil Donahue. If you'll just raise your hand, he will bring you the mic. Here you go, Ricardo. And if you'll identify yourself and direct your question to whoever.
Sure, this will be a question for Rod. Daniel Bloom with CQ. At the NARUC winter meetings in February, Assistant DOE Secretary John Kotek said that DOE would finalize by the end of 2016 what that consent-based siting process would look like for a consolidated interim storage facility. Could you elaborate on what the process was that you guys undertook in order to reach this consent-based condition?
Yeah, what we did in Texas, we started with low level, and we went out through the local community. They actually recruited us to place a low-level radioactive waste landfill there. And through that community organization, we reached out further to the Permian Basin, the broader region, including New Mexico. We're on the border of New Mexico, and then further reached out to the entire state. That resulted in legislation being passed in the state of Texas, authorizing a private company such as ourselves to apply for a license. I would expect a similar type of process. We've started that discussion already with our local community. We've been engaged with the state as far as keeping them up to date on where we're at. And at this point, we're waiting on the federal government for actions that would allow the state to continue moving forward on this.
And Daniel, let me address that as well. That's actually what I did for WCS. To give you all some perspective and background in Texas, we had a low-level radioactive waste authority that was formed in response to this legislation in the 1980s. They spent 20 years trying to permit a site. They did great technical work. They did really bad public outreach work. So every time they tried to have a site, it failed. And then Governor Bush eliminated that authority altogether and said, you guys have failed. And then the legislation was subsequently passed authorizing a private company to do this. From WCS perspective, you can't get there if the public's not fully briefed, fully on board, fully understands what's going on. So we went out with the education outreach first, just as we're doing with high-level waste, because that's the only way to do it. We took it to such extremes. Before the license was going to be voted on in 2009, we bought television advertising in the Permian Basin media market, so everybody knew we're seeking a license. This is what we want to do. There's no shortcuts to getting local consent.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So the authorizing vehicle for consent, I think everyone can hear me.
Oh,
So the authorizing vehicle for consent is legislation dating back to the 1980s? There's no new outreach?
No. Authorizing for consent, in 2003, the state authorized a private company to do this. Then in 2011 and in 2013, the issue was revisited, and each time the support got stronger.
Hi, Stephanie Cook, Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. I have two questions. One is, could you clarify the legal situation with the DOE, whether or not the DOE needs a new law to permit it to take fuel in transport casks to an interim site, if there's a need for new legislation to do this? Because one of you mentioned the need for cooperation from Congress on this, so I'd love to have an elaboration on that. And the second relates more to intellectual property question. You mentioned that in the future you'd like to take other technologies to put in the WCS system. And I wonder if if that's feasible, I mean, from a licensing perspective and so forth, you'll have to know the details of the technology to do that. And how do you get around that little issue?
I think all
Sure.
three of these guys are.
I'll handle the first one, and then I'll leave the intellectual property question to Ariva and NAC. On DOE, we have heard the same statements you have, where the Secretary has said that he thinks maybe there is authority out there. For us, we're excited that there's 2 bills out in the House. There's Senate appropriations language. There's been some discussion that the department may have authority already. Whichever venue that takes, we're excited that this could potentially make this project go forward. So we're here, we've got a long relationship with DOE. They own or will take title to our federal facility where we put low-level radioactive waste. They'll also take title to our byproduct facility where we put uranium mill-tailing waste. This interim storage facility is just to the north of that. So we've had contracts with DOE for, almost 20 years. They've been a great partner, and they have some very sharp, intelligent people there. So we look forward to seeing how this situation resolves itself, and we think over the next 3 years, as our license gets reviewed by NRC, that picture will become more clear.
And I agree 100%. We believe you absolutely do need, if you're going to license a system, you need that systems vendor and OEM to be able to make it work, and that's what we've done. So Ariva and NAC are fierce competitors in some areas, but we have an interlocking cooperative agreement with WCS, and we work together. Each of us provides the intellectual property for our systems. Going forward, we envision bringing other vendors under the same cooperative agreements so that we can incorporate them, and we'd have the vendor that designed the system helping us to license it. And I will say, this worked very well. We were a little, not skeptical, but wondering how it would, but in 12 months, we were able to work together very efficiently and deliver on time a very extensive license application. So it demonstrated it can work, and that's our model going forward.
Right down here, Ricardo.
Hi, Marie Sandicott for the Texas Tribune. What do you have to say to critics that say that all counties through which these highly radioactive materials will be transported should have a say in this facility's creation or licensing?
I think we ought to start with Mike McMahon, and then the rest of them can address it as well.
Okay, well, certainly, I mean, for transportation, there does need to be outreach, information, training, and that's absolutely correct. But, we transport tremendous amounts of materials every day. Navy transports nuclear fuel on a routine basis. The system that works well. They're informed. The communities are engaged, but in terms of interstate commerce, I think you'd shut down the entire economy if that's how it worked for transportation. So we do believe outreach, connection, interaction, training, support, but it's really commerce. It's not an individual consent basis.
Rod, Mike, can you speak to the record, the safety record of transporting spent fuel or radioactive material in the United States?
Certainly, and as I said before in our record, it was clear we've had 50 years of transportation of used nuclear fuel. We actually transport 1,200 tons of fuel every single year in Europe. And as I said, we've had the fuel actually has not been damaged during transport, and there have been no incidents where there have been leaks from the cask. So it's a very, very long track record. These casks, if you've seen them, they're very robust. It's about 150 tons of steel wrapped around these canisters. They're designed to take punishments that other cargoes aren't. They can, we probably should get some of those videos out sometime, but they can direct impact by another train, fire. They're really designed to maintain their integrity in any event. So we've had an impeccable record around the world of transport. The Navy, I'm ex-Navy myself, has been transporting fuel for decades without incident. So this is something that has a very strong track record and I think is extremely, extremely safe. Probably, I will say one of the safest things that we do in nuclear actually is specifically the transportation of these materials.
Jeff Beatty with the Energy Daily. I also have 2 questions. One of them is really quick. How much do you think this could, I'm not sure who would take it, probably Rod. How much do you think it's going to cost DOE to use your services, just as a ballpark number? And then secondly, you're looking for some things out of Congress to get this done, and that sort of thing's been tough to get lately. Just as sort of a glass half empty look at things, if you don't get what you want from Congress, is there a possible backup plan by which you could contract directly with the utilities to take the fuel off their hands?
Yeah, so we did look at the cost benefit of what does it cost average to run an ISFSI at the nuclear power plants and have it spread across the nation versus consolidate that into one. We would save DOE hundreds of millions of dollars. In addition, you would also be able to free up that land from the nuclear power plants such as Rancho Seco that have been decommissioned and return those back to the community. They could sell those, and that would also provide over $1 billion for that benefit. So it is definitely economical to consolidate these. Instead of 10 licenses, you have one. Instead of 10 security forces, you have one. And you can keep updating it with the most robust, technologically advancements as we go through this. Second question was?
What if we don't get?
Other options. If we have looked at the option of, is it possible that nuclear plants would want to send it to us if DOE did not take title to it? We've had some frank discussions with some of the CNOs in the industry, and they basically said, if it's still going to be my liability at the end of the day, I'd rather not transfer it. I'd rather be able to see it when I look out my window and analyze my plant. So we don't think it has legs unless DOE is able to do this.
Hi, Carl Harkenroder with Exchange Monitor. My question is for Rod. I was curious, what is your response to the House GOP who wants to deny funding for consent-based siting in their appropriations bill?
Yeah, as I said, WCS is excited because there are 2 bills in the House and Senate appropriations language. This is a long process. We've got 3 years before we're through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We think there are solutions out there. And I'll also take this opportunity to say we totally agree there needs to be a permanent repository. There is no shirking that duty. It's important for us, for the nation, for everybody who's out there. But it's also a long process, and there are some immediate benefits you'd get from interim storage. We also think interim storage would help alleviate some of the contentions that have been out there on some of the licensing applications for permanent repositories, such as transportation. If you had the routes and had been doing that and had a track record, that may be easier than trying to do that for a permanent repository.
All right, great. We want to thank everybody for coming out.